afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar on public involvement in the transportation decision. This webinar is one of a series hosted by the AASHTO Technical Committee on Project Management. I'm Patricia Bush, Program Manager for Bridges and Design at AASHTO, and today's host. Before we get started, a few housekeeping notes to help you enjoy today's session. All attendees are automatically muted for the entire webinar. If you have questions at any point during the presentations, you can submit them by using the Q&A button on your Zoom webinar control panel. We will answer them as time allows at the end of the presentations. This session is being recorded, and the link will be made available on the Technical Committee on Project Management webpage. You can navigate to it by going to transportation.org/design, selecting Technical Committees, then Project Management from the menu on the left. An email with a PDA certificate will be sent to all registered attendees later this week. If you can't find it, be sure to check your spam or junk folders. Download the certificate and keep it for your records. Now I'd like to introduce today's moderators, Kenny Voss with the Missouri Department of Transportation, and then Jeff Clanton with the Indiana Department of Transportation.
Thanks, Patricia. It's my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Linda Horn. Linda is the Director of Communications for the Missouri Department of Transportation. She has served in leadership and strategic communication roles for MoDOT in both the Central Office and St. Louis District for nearly 33 years. Her career at MoDOT has focused on strategic communications for internal and external audiences, public involvement, crisis communications, media relations, major design build projects, and safety initiatives. Some of those unique projects have included the creation of humorous safety messages for the interstate dynamic message signs, the launch of the Buckle Up, Phone Down campaign, and messaging for the 2017 and 2024 solar eclipses. For nearly 20 years in the St. Louis District, she served as the communications manager and member of the leadership team for some of MoDOT's most visible and innovative projects, such as the full closure and rebuilding of the I-64 in the heart of St. Louis, the construction of the Route 364 Page Avenue extension, the River Bridge construction of the I-64 Daniel Boone Bridge, and the I-70 Blanchette Bridge. She also has been involved in creating, implementing, and expanding MoDOT's core services, such as the customer service, call center, and development of internal area teams. She has been recognized with local, state, and national awards throughout her career. Linda has a bachelor's degree in journalism from the University of Missouri at Columbia, and she and her husband, Greg, together have 5 grown children. Jeff Clanton will now introduce our other speakers.
Thanks, Kenny. The second presentation this afternoon by Sarah Rubin and Tim Miller will provide a look at some successful public information strategies implemented on INDOT's I-69 Finish Line project. Sarah Rubin currently serves as the INDOT Project Delivery Support Director and the I-69 Finish Line Corridor Project Manager. She has worked for INDOT since 2013, where she has held roles in project management, major projects, and tolling. She holds a master's in public administration from Indiana University, focusing on public finance, policy analysis, and economic development. As part of her role at INDOT, Sarah appreciates the opportunity to collaborate with a variety of internal and external stakeholders to enhance Indiana's transportation infrastructure. In her spare time, she enjoys being outdoors and hiking with family. Tim Miller is a vice president and senior project manager at HNTB. He served at the Indiana Department of Transportation for 9 years before joining HNTB in 2001. Tim worked on the I-69 planning studies when he was at INDOT and has been an I-69 project manager since joining HNTB. He's also managing the planning of modernizing INDOT's urban interstates in downtown Indianapolis as an INDOT Pell study. Tim graduated from Indiana State University with a Bachelor's of Science in Aviation Management and has a Master's in Public Administration from Indiana University. So I think we're ready for Linda.
Thank you, Jeff. I'm going to share my screen and we'll get started. All right. I believe everybody should see my screen at this point.
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, so I'm going to start by the first half of the presentations today is really going to talk about public involvement in general and sort of the process that we go through to get informed consent from your audiences to successfully deliver a project. There we go. So important part of public involvement is that as we do project development and delivery, it's really a two-part equation. And yes, it's a math equation for all of the engineers out there. Obviously, you have the technical side, your evaluations, environmental, the planning, the design has to be done by experts. But your technical work needs to be continuously discussed with people, with the area stakeholders. Sometimes we refer to them as potentially affected audiences. And that's an ongoing public involvement. It's not a do it once and be done with it. It's a continuous checking in with your audiences as you progress through project delivery. So the key to success is that you must continuously build informed consent as you develop the technical plans to solve the problem. And I say problem for a reason, right? So first of all, when you start any project, you have to understand the purpose of that project. What is the need that we're addressing? What problem are we solving? And are we the right organization to work on that? If you can't answer those questions as an organization, you really need to kind of stop and evaluate why are you working on this? And in identifying the problem, you know, a lot of times as technical experts, engineers are very focused on the solution. And we like to describe to the public what's the new shiny new design that we've come up with that's going to be the next greatest thing. Whether it was the diverging diamond interchange design that we started here in Missouri, or some variation on a roundabout or a single point. But that doesn't necessarily mean something to the public. We think the public's going to go, wow, this is great and cool, but most likely not. So the key to working with the public is to focus on what's the problem. How do they describe the problem that they're experiencing with the road before we fix it? What would happen if we didn't solve the problem? Some of that is your purpose and need, right? But I also don't like to use the phrase purpose and need with the public. It's difficult for them to understand, I think. And so talking about what is the problem that we see as experts and what is the problem that they experience on a day-to-day basis. The next important part of your public involvement process is to really get in and identify those audiences, really get into a detailed list of audiences. And it's more than just your direct impacts. It can be people indirectly. And sometimes it's people who think they're affected. We might realize they're really not affected by what we're doing, but if they think they're impacted, that's a perception, and you need to work on those relationships as well. So here's just some examples. And again, these are still sort of like categories of audiences, but I like to sit down with the project teams and look at the specific area of the project and really start to identify who is the Chamber of Commerce. Is there a hospital? Is there a university? Is there a historic district? Is it a major festival area? Is it what kind of school districts are involved? Obviously, your local, state, and federal elected officials, but you want to have a very extensive list of who are those exact audiences, how to reach them, And then the other part of that puzzle is looking at it from an environmental justice view and trying to identify what kind of diversity of communities might live in the area. Do you have English second language? Do you have folks who have limited computer or internet access to information, or limited ability to get to a public meeting? And then as you put your plan together, how are we going to address all those audiences? And the next part of the equation is to really think about what are those project specific issues? What are the things that could be the headlines for the project? What are the things that people are going to be concerned about? And try to look at that project in terms of how your audiences see it. What if that was my business on the corner? What if that was my route to work or my kid's way to school? So here's just some general categories. What kind of property are we buying? Are we closing or changing access? What are the construction traffic impacts going to be? Are businesses going to feel like there's a potential loss to their business, either during construction or potentially with a change in access or how people will use the corridor when we're done? Sometimes we get concerns from emergency responders, again, either during construction, their response time, or when it's done, if we've changed, how they get around. So really trying to drill into what are the issues that your audiences might bring up so we can work on a plan for that. And as you communicate with the public, you want to emphasize on these 4 points. First of all, you want to state the problem and explain the seriousness of the situation. And this could include how old is the road or the bridge, how severe is the congestion, how is it from a safety perspective? Is it higher than what's average for that type of road? What are the words that other people might use to describe what's wrong with the road or transportation network at the time? Obviously, we would be stating this is a state highway, and so it's MoDOT's responsibility to address that problem. The next item is that you want to share with the public that we have a process. Share with them what that process is. What's the timeline? What are the steps that we're going to go through? And that there are steps along the way that the public will be able to interact with us. And lastly, you got to share that we understand that these changes, whether it's the final product or during construction, is going to affect people. We realize that. We're listening, we care, we want to work with you, and we want your input as we move along. Sometimes I think of these as like the life preserver. And when a project is going wrong, we go back to this. And are we saying these things? Once you've really worked through all of that, then is the time that you really sit down and go, okay, what's the plan? How are we going to communicate this information? And there's so many tools out there, social media, websites, email blasts, different things. But one item that I wanted to emphasize that I've had great success with is when you're working with those stakeholders on a project is identifying how you can provide them information about where you are in the process and public opportunities, and they put that in their information. So, for example, when we closed Interstate 64 in St. Louis for 2 years through the heart of the city, there's a major hospital complex that employs 30,000 people on a daily basis. I provided the hospital communications team a couple of paragraphs every month for their employee newsletter. And then they sent it to 30,000 people who were commuting to work every day. I didn't have to maintain a list of 30,000 people. I didn't have to figure out how to reach them. And those employees already trusted that source of their employer. And and so that it sort of verified, validated the information that I was getting out to them. So anytime you can tap into those existing sources of information, getting information to a church, they share it with their parishioners. Getting it to a university, they share it with their students and staff, is just another way of sort of like spreading how we can reach people. Just wanted to share, this is a super simple example, but this is kind of hits some of the nutshell items. This is from a MoDOT website. It's just a bridge replacement project in a rural part of the state. But I just want to emphasize that even though it's just a simple project, each bridge is going to be closed for up to 4 months. That's a big impact for the people who use it every day. And you'll see down here, we have a little thing we always have on the website, which is what's the problem? And for each of these 2 bridges, we take note of when the original bridge was built, the fact that it's one bridge is a single lane, the other has very narrowed lanes. It's having a lot of deterioration, and we have to get in there and repair it, replace it. The other part is to make sure that you have a timeline, that you're sharing information with people. And this is a way where people can get information on their news releases. You notice we'll have, some basic FAQs. And then when possible, we always try to include a map of where it's at and pictures. This is a picture of the existing. And I find it incredibly important to share the existing, and especially on a bridge. I love having pictures that show, the ugly underneath of the rust or the deterioration or whatever. So people can go, okay, I can understand the 4 months of pain because that needs to be repaired. And you'll notice on here too, when we had public meetings, it was on this website. Every public meeting that MoDOT has, we always provide a virtual option as well, where people can see everything that was available and be able to make comments. So as you move along, it's important to continuously make a loop with this, and to really be thinking about your audiences and thinking about, are there any relationships that are broken? What kind of comments are you getting? When you go out and give a speech on the project, what questions are you being asked? And those questions, maybe that needs to get incorporated into your next speech, or make sure it's emphasized on the website. You need to constantly look at that. And our projects sometimes take a long time. If you start communicating in the planning and environmental, by the time we get to construction, it could be years. Mayors have changed, state reps and senators have changed, and you're kind of needing to kind of go back and, bring people up to speed and bring them along. I wanted to share one other quick example today that is a project here in Missouri that I think is a good example of when something went wrong. So this just happened to us in the last basically year and a half. In the city of Springfield, Missouri, which is the 3rd largest city in Missouri, we had a project on what's called Sunshine Street. It's also a state road. And we wanted to make some changes to that with, access management, helping to reduce crashes and pedestrian issues and other things. And so we put together a proposal with the public, and we were sharing with them, tried to share with them the problem. You can see on this map, the project is a 4-mile stretch, and in that 4 miles, we had 728 total crashes. In addition, the city of Springfield police also had another 297 that were just property damage. So over 1,000 crashes between a 5-year period of what was going on with this road. And, you know, from the engineer's perspective, it was like, well, this is obvious. We need to go in and make drastic changes to this road from a safety standpoint. So the engineers came forward with basic access management principles, right? So the idea was you want to reduce the number of conflict points. This was a typical 5-lane urban arterial section. So you got the center dual left turn lane. And so our original proposal was to put a median down the middle, and that would help reduce the crash rates significantly. So the problem with that proposal, this was the original proposal that we provided. Didn't mean to click that. And you'll notice on here that only less than a mile of the 4 miles was actually getting a raised median in the middle, but the initial public reaction to it and the initial comments that were in the news was that all 4 miles, it was going to be continuous. No businesses were going to be able, you weren't going to be able to get into those businesses. And we pretty much immediately had public opposition. Here's a sample of some of the headlines that we had with concerns about the medians, concerns with business access. And you'll notice the city council actually voted 7-1 to stop the project. Our director of MoDOT actually went down and attended a city council meeting and said, we hear you, we're going to stop, we're going to start over, we're going to look at this. So due to those concerns from the business owners, the MoDOT team regrouped, we looked at our problem, we went back, and we focused on telling the story of the crashes and talking to people about the difficulty that they experienced trying to turn left in and out of these businesses and the difficulty with getting the gap. And people said, yeah, it's a big problem. That's step number 1 to bringing them on board. So in the end, we made changes to our design based on that input from the public. We took out a little bit of the raised medians. We added some U-turn locations. We added some more right turn lanes. And the end result, we had a better design, still managing to do what the engineers needed it to do, but accounting for that public input. And ultimately, that's where you want to be. You want your design to be better and the public to feel like they were heard, and yet we're still accomplishing the safety improvements that we needed to make. So on a quick sum up here, so in summary, when you're putting together your public involvement plan, you want to make sure that the problem that you are working on is clearly identified, and not just how we describe it, but also how the public describes it. You want to make sure that you're really digging down into who those audiences are and finding a way to reach them, developing that plan to reach them, and then, continuing that loop over and over again as you work through the phases of the project. This is my contact information. I'm going to leave it there for just a second before I hand this over to Indiana. So we're going to take questions at the end. So right now I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to hand this over to Tim and Sarah in Indiana.
Great. Thank you, Linda. I'm going to go ahead and share our screen, and then Tim is going to take us through the beginning of this presentation. So stand by.
Okay, does everyone see the title slide, Public Involvement in Transportation Decision?
Yes.
I think that's a great. Okay, so what we're going to do, we're just going to talk a little bit about, some of this is going to be a little bit building on what Linda did, but then we're going to provide a case example. And when we talk about the importance of public involvement in the planning process and transportation planning, what you're going to see through Sarah and I over the next 20 minutes is, obviously we're reaching that NEPA decision in many cases, but what we're saying is that involvement with that transportation decision continues even through the NEPA decision into design, into construction, because it's never final until the construction is complete. So these are just some points. We won't sit here and read through them about obviously the importance of public involvement. And I think one of the words that we talked about that Linda even mentioned is, how do we build that trust with the community? How do we build that trust with our stakeholders? And we're going to talk a little bit about some of those techniques we utilize here in Indiana. When you think about public involvement, even from the last 10, 15, 20 years, a lot of the traditional methods of engagement, including going to a large high school and, doing a presentation, having comment sheets, you have your community advisory committees and whatnot. And while that is still applicable today, some of the more modern techniques are obviously social media is a big part of that, whether that's Instagram, Facebook. If you go out on TikTok and some of the other social media platforms, you're going to find that if you aren't communicating the message, someone else is communicating it for you. So that's something we just need to be aware of. A lot of virtual meetings, obviously with the pandemic, virtual meetings really took a higher profile, and making sure just like this, that people can attend and provide input. Some interactive GIS maps that we'll talk about. But when you think about the best practices using some of our modern technology or traditional approach, it's all about that early and continuous improvement, making sure that our outreach has a very inclusive and diversified outreach plan, that we're reaching everybody on all the areas of the project, and making sure that we make it more educational. Obviously, we want to present, but we want to listen. I think, Linda, you talked about really making sure that we listen to our stakeholders, and that's something that we want to make sure that we do. These are just some of the photos that, the traditional way of just highlighting big high school auditoriums. What we're doing here in Indiana is we're really making it very strategic and very targeted. We're going to coffee shops, we're going to art fairs. In the upper right and the lower left, you'll see where we go to school carnivals, where the project is at. We actually are going where the people are. We want to make sure that we go to where they are instead of asking them come to us. So that might be a high school, it might be a parent-teacher conference night, it might be again, just a wide variety of different types of venues that we can think about. Homeowner association meetings, so forth, that we go to them to where that project is. So there's very little effort for them to provide some for their input. Once we get that input, we really want to make sure that we confirm that we heard what they told us. And so what we have started doing is this on a planning study we're doing is, we had about 1,200 comments on a 9-month period on a recent on a planning study we're working on right now. And so that next time we went out to the public in coffee shops and art fairs and festivals, we actually put those comments, we sort of grouped them together into 4 buckets, and you can see them right here of quality of life, economic growth, transportation, mobility, and equity. And really, we summarize what we heard, because that's very important to that stakeholder. It's great that you go out and you listen and you solicit that feedback, but it's equally important to make sure that you go back and test, look, this is what we think we heard. Can you confirm that? Or if not, can you add to it or maybe modify it a little bit? And so that's something that, again, you're just building trust with that stakeholder. Another thing that we are doing is every time we're going out to a public involvement and really reaching out, we sort of, we document where we've been in a certain community. And we do that through GIS, we do that through electronic means, so that there's a good solid documentation of making sure that we are reaching our audience, whether it's in a low-income population, whether it's in an area that we need to make sure that we collect comment. It just provides us a good measure of, are we reaching the people that is affected by the project, as well as other stakeholders as well. So this is something just from a technology standpoint, we use that to make sure that we have a good representation of where we go. So really, we don't, I think most of you are probably aware of obviously some of the challenges and solutions and improvements, and we'll send this slideshow out, but it's something that on an everyday basis here with Indiana DOT and our partners, that we really go out and make sure, let's identify the challenges, let's come up with the solutions, and then let's measure those solutions as our project advances. I'm going to show you just a little thing that this is about a 1-minute video that talks about. It's very important that we talk to the community, and it's great that we are advocate for our own projects and our own system. This is sort of what we also implement here is we talk to our stakeholders and have them help us tell the story. That's very important. I mean, obviously for DOTs, we could tell a story, but it's just equally important for our stakeholders to tell a story. And so this is some of the snippets that we took on one of our planning projects that help them tell a story for us.
There's a huge opportunity. There's a huge opportunity for those who are directly impacted by the interstate.
It's important to be a part of programs and projects like Propel Indy, simply because you don't want to get to the end of a project or a program or construction and say, what if, and complain about what should be.
I think as many people as possible should be engaged with Propel Indy, because whether you drive or you use a car share service or you ride the bus, the interstate and its development is going to impact you in one way or another.
Our goal is to impact life cycles of generations of Hoosier families. So we need your input, we need your support, we need your thoughts and ideas, and let's do this together.
Okay, that's a planning study that we're doing here in Indiana about how do we modernize our downtown interstates. And as you saw, we have a large stakeholders. We put this out, and actually people are really excited about giving us a testimony on that. And we push that out through our social media channels, and we get thousands of likes on that. And so again, it's just not us, the DOT, pushing out our message, but we actually have stakeholders that are helping us push that message out for us. So that's something that you might want to consider as well. We're now going to go shift into a case study. This is the new I-69 project in Indiana. As you can see, it's about a 142-mile corridor that we have been Sarah and I have been working on for more than a decade. And we want to talk a little bit about some of the methods and the techniques and public involvement that we use to ultimately make the decision. But just as important, keeping those same stakeholders engaged. Once we reach that decision, that NEPA decision, how do we keep them engaged throughout the design and ultimately through the construction project? So as you can see, just to give you a quick snapshot before I turn it over to Sarah, this was 142 miles. It was divided into 6 sections, each one being about 20 to 30 miles. As you can see here, the construction started around 2008, and we are just going to wrap it up this year in 2024. Sections, we called sections 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 by that name. But then once we reached the northernmost segment, we branded it I-69 Finish Line. And so there's something from a communication standpoint, we want to make sure the branding attaches really an image of what we're trying to do. And so obviously with the history of racing here in Indiana and it being the final section that connects the two cities between Evansville and Indianapolis, we branded this in 2019 of the Finish Line. As you can see, that finish line, again, that last section that Sarah and I have been working on for more than a decade is about 26 miles of new interstates and 8 miles of an I-465 and 10 new interchanges. So just to put this in perspective before I turn this over to Sarah, we had about 94 at-grade access points prior to us upgrading existing State Road 37 to an interstate. And so we took that 94 down to 10 interchanges. So you can imagine the public involvement that needed to take place. And this is some of our engagement tools that we used really starting in 2014 on how do we make sure that we get good input as we figure out how we're going to upgrade an existing 4-lane facility to an interstate highway, reducing the number of access points from 94 to 10, added travel lanes, interstate condition. And so this is some of the things that we used. One of our largest things was our social media channels. Again, you can sort of see here, we really pushed out the project information on Facebook and Instagram and YouTube channels and really just trying to stay ahead of the curve on the technology. This wasn't so much that play in 2014, but as we grew and the technology grew, it grew with us. So we actually did a weekly newsletter once we got into construction and sent that out. And still there today that we send out. More than our listserv includes more than 10,000 people for this. Again, getting input, not necessarily on the decision, but sort of the project itself. So now I'm going to turn it over to Sarah, and she's going to sort of take us through how we started NEPA, but then more importantly, or just as important, how do we take this from NEPA all the way through construction, and how did that communication drive the decision?
Back here for a second. Hi, everyone. Thank you. We appreciate the opportunity to be here. Thank you, Tim, for the handoff. So as Tim mentioned, we're going to touch on NEPA. We're also going to talk about NEPA through design and construction, how we have engaged members of the community, how we have interacted with the media, and then also how we have interacted within the team itself in collaboration with our partners in design and in construction. So to start with NEPA, as you see on the screen, we had more than 4,000 attendees across all of the meetings that we held. In fact, one of the meetings, INDOT's largest meeting, had approximately 2,000 people, which is that picture on the upper left. We filled to capacity a local high school gymnasium. But beyond that, there were hundreds of smaller meetings that were held with anywhere from chambers of commerce, one-on-one meetings with businesses, with residents, schools, a variety of the stakeholders that Linda touched on earlier in her presentation were key to the foundation that we started to set during the environmental process for this project. One of the elements that was also integrated into our environmental process was making sure that we had materials available in multiple languages. So as we were evaluating the corridor and identifying areas that were impacted, either minority areas or other EJ areas, it was identified that we had a significant Burmese population in the northern end of our corridor, and then also sprinkled throughout the corridor a variety of folks that spoke Spanish. And so we made our surveys available. And many of our handouts were made available across Burmese, Spanish, and English. So that was something that kind of helped build inroads with different stakeholders within the community. A couple of unique things that we've done as part of the project. So on the top of the screen there, we had the Myra Lane Bridge blessing. So we had an overpass that was connecting local access roads that were new on the west side of I-69 over to an area where there was a church and some residential properties and a business. And so it was a unique opportunity to bring those that were impacted, the church, the residents, members of the community together to celebrate that connection. And the leadership of the church thought, what better way to do it than to bless the bridge as well. So that was something that was fun, not only for the community, but the project team as well. On the bottom of the screen there is an example of one of a handful of community days that we've had with our contractor at the northern end of the corridor. So this was our initial kickoff one, where we went to a local park and did a lot of trail rehab and rehab of shelter houses and things like that. And it was really just a great way to bond with the designers and the contractors as we launched the project. So as I mentioned before, we'll kind of touch on some of the other strategies that we've used to kind of help bolster that partnership with our project team members. Additionally, we have hosted a variety of field visits. So this group that's on the screen right now is actually our largest group that came out last fall. It's the undergrad engineers from Purdue University. We had about 55 students that came out. But beyond that, we have had a variety of students from elementary schools, middle schools, high schools that are either in STEM programs or construction and transportation related outreach programs to get folks out into whether it's engineering or into any of the different trades that are part of the transportation industry. And so we felt like this was a good snapshot to kind of illustrate not only the importance of bringing folks out onto the site, but also there's a nice quote on there from the professor that helps coordinate that. And it's just a great way to get people excited about transportation. As I mentioned before, STEM outreach in the schools. So we've gone out to a variety of schools that are adjacent to the project to, explain to them what's going on, because, many of them drive the corridor, either, for the high schoolers, they're literally driving the corridor, but also, other students who are driving the corridor with family members and friends and that kind of thing, to kind of, like I said, keep them up to date on how the landscape is changing, the timeline of the project, that type of thing. But then we've also brought out different members of the project team. So public involvement team, some of our bridge specialists, some of our project managers, to kind of give the students a flavor for the different types of career paths that are available within the transportation industry. As far as engagement with the communities, which Tim talked about earlier, one of the other elements that kind of came out of that during the environmental process were the aesthetics that came to fruition along the corridor. So as part of our environmental process, we had a provision, let's say, in our environmental document called context sensitive solutions, which enabled us to look at aesthetic treatments within the communities, gateways, that type of thing. And so each of the counties along the corridor and the city of Indianapolis and the city of Martinsville each had the opportunity to weigh in on what aesthetics they wanted in their community. That ranged from ornamental lighting to, as you can see on the lower left there, some monuments in the city of Martinsville, some brick treatment on the bridges and MSE walls, and really gave the different communities the opportunity to kind of put a stamp on their portion of the corridor as people were entering their respective communities. Additionally, I guess expanding upon construction outreach for a moment, we've talked about community service, we've talked about the presentations and the STEM outreach that we've done. We've also, during design and construction, had a variety of neighborhood meetings with homeowner associations, businesses, Chamber of Commerce, MIBOR, which is a real estate organization for Central Indiana. As Tim mentioned before, the website and social media channels, really trying to kind of on all angles, touch as many people as we can to give them updates on the project, and also, answer their questions. The case management stats there are just kind of a snapshot of the number of cases that we have addressed each year. NDOT has a customer service call center. It's 855 NDOT for you, that kind of takes in all the calls statewide and then farms them out to the different projects or different specialty areas to get answers. And so we've had a great partnership with them to get the questions answered by the public. And if we don't know the answer or it's a new issue that has popped up, we definitely have the ability to get the right people plugged in to make sure that we're addressing any issues in a timely manner. As far as media outreach, we've had a variety of media briefings as part of the project across what I would consider all three phases of the project so far. That top left picture, we took a variety of media crews out into our system-to-system interchange, not only because it's an exciting place to be where we're tying I-69 into 465. But also in the case of that particular event, which was last summer, we had two directional closures of 465. So each direction was closed for 17 days. They were non-concurrent, but it was a big enough disruption to the traffic along 465 that we really felt like it was important to get our media partners out there and kind of immerse them in what was going on and be able to answer their questions in depth, so that they in turn could, and here's a good example of the media coverage, so that they in turn could convey that out to the larger community within Central Indiana. A couple of ways that we also, in addition to having the media out, we had digital and standard billboards that we rented, like the one that's in that lower right-hand corner. We also did radio ads, and then just kind of kept pushing on the local news coverage whenever we had updates, just to make sure that the most up-to-date information was relevant was available to the broader public. A couple of, I would say, fun community events for our project team. This corridor is being shielded in 3 different phases. And so we started down in Martinsville and we shielded the first 5 miles there. That was, we opened that back in 2021. At the end of 2022, we shielded the next 17 miles of I-69. And then there are a couple of photos there at the top of some of the interchanges that we have opened along the way. And really, it's just a great opportunity to get the project team out, especially, as I mentioned, the importance of fostering those relationships between the NDOT team, the contracting team, the designers, because it really takes a whole village of people to get these projects delivered. And while some of the folks are literally out there on the ground every day building those assets, it's great to get everybody together and see how all of their hard work has kind of blended together to make these the project come to fruition. As I kind of mentioned before, we had a couple of shielding events. We've also had a monument ribbon cutting. So in Martinsville, going back to those aesthetic treatments, we had two monuments that were constructed in Martinsville. And so it's just a unique way for the community to commemorate a new feature, a new landmark feature within their community. Partnering with contractors, as I've kind of touched on a little bit, has been key to the overall success, I would say, of the project, making sure that we have a direct line of communication with them, that everybody feels comfortable to raise issues or topics. It's just really been, I think, important so that people don't put their hackles up and kind of view it as our side versus their side. It's really kind of fostered a nice relationship and a lot of great problem solving as we've navigated the delivery of the project. Just a couple more slides. I know I'm a couple seconds over here. Another way that we have interacted with the community or kind of brought ourselves out to the community is through these employee spotlights that we've done that are available on our project website. So the folks that are all on the screen, we've made videos about each individual one of them, not only to kind of share with the broader community career paths, but also to kind of put faces and names with those that are out there on the ground delivering the project or back in the office answering public involvement questions. And so it's just a nice way, like I said, to kind of humanize the project. A couple of other aspects as far as community coordination. So this photo that's on the upper right is one of the connection points in the city of Martinsville that received an Indiana ACEC Engineering Excellence Award and also an AASHTO Award. The significance of this bridge, this location was previously a stoplight on State Road 37 where it was not intended to have pedestrian access, but pedestrians were crossing there, and it was between a neighborhood and a high school over to a shopping and business area. And so providing this overpass connection that not only carries pedestrians, bicycles, and vehicles was really paramount to the safety of the community. And so it's something that we really, from the engagement process with the community, we really take pride in the creation of this bridge. We've also had the opportunity to be called before the Indiana Senate to be acknowledged for the efforts along the corridor, which is a unique opportunity for the broader project team. And that's the photos that are in the upper left-hand corner there. We also had a beam signing ceremony as we were erecting the system-to-system interchange. We have a really large 1,700 foot radius ramp in our system-to-system interchange, and this is the last beam that was going to go up. And so we brought out the governor and the commissioner and our executive staff and literally had a beam signing ceremony where we all got to put our names or particular messages on there. So it's just a fun team building activity, but also something that was very memorable for everybody that was involved. And then we're going to close out on a slide or a quick video related to that system-to-system interchange because it is so unique to be tying one interstate into another. It's not something that we do here very often in Indiana, and I know that there are only probably a handful of places throughout the country that are undertaking those type of projects. So with that, we'll play that, and then we will open it up for questions.
And I think one of the things that we are, as you can see on our videos, we're pretty big on videos, and that's, again, we want to make sure we explain to the community all that the community engagement does not stop once you reach that NEPA decision. We want to make sure that they understand we took your comments, we addressed it, may not address it the way you wanted it to, but we just wanted to make sure we had that coordination with them and they could see the end of how their comments influenced that final product. So
I guess one thing to add, thank you, Jeff, is that as part of the project process, specifically when we are moving out of environmental and into design, we had what are called kitchen table meetings. And so part of our public involvement team actually went out and met with individual businesses and residents and literally sat at their, kitchen table or conference table at the business or met them at a coffee shop and talked through how the project was specifically impacting them, either their access or their property, and really kind of helped distill for the design team where we could try to further minimize impacts. And then ultimately, that relayed into the right-of-way acquisition process when we ultimately had to acquire parcels or portions of parcels for the project.
All right. Thank you all for the presentations. We do have a few questions, but for the audience, please type your questions into the Q&A box so that we can answer them as they're entered and read them out so everybody can hear them. So first question is for Linda. How do you manage grandstanding or specific stakeholders that you know will be outspoken against a project?
And that's always the most difficult part, right? And I think that Tim said this comment, about if you're not saying it, somebody else will. I kind of go the same way with you have to address the most outspoken people. They're not going to go away. So the way that I typically work that situation is to try to back them up to get them to talk about the problems they experience, right? So again, they may not like the design of the solution, but if you can at least get them to agree, yes, what's there isn't working. I have this problem, I have that problem, and try to get them on the page of we have to do something. It would be irresponsible if we didn't do something. And then, try to work them back into, kind of calming them down and let's really get into what you're really worried about. And is there something we can do to address that or not? So.
Great. Thank you. So I think this one is for Tim and Sarah. With so many options, how do you determine which PI tools to use?
Well, we use all of them, and I think we have such a diverse audience and stakeholder in our corridor. When you're talking about 26 miles, there are some people that all they do is get their information off a phone. There are some people that don't have a phone. So I think it's important that you have to know your stakeholders, and I think Linda sort of mentioned this before. You have to know your audience, and that's one of the things of being trained in PI. You have to understand who you're communicating to, because you're going to need all of the different types of PI tools in order to be effective. So it could be very simple, it could be very highly tech, but that's just, you have to know your audience first, unless you want to add anything.
Yep, I would agree.
Okay, thank you. We have a question. This is open to anybody. How do you address when a state agency is in conflict with what the public wants? This is regarding a historic segment of road. Anyone? Any suggestions?
I think, again, I think it's you've got to start back with, for example, when we first proposed closing Interstate 64 in St. Louis, one of the busiest thoroughfares through the city, people were like, oh my gosh, but it was like, we have an 80-year-old road. The pavement is falling apart. We had 13 bridges. Half of them were in such bad shape, they were going to need to be closed at any time. And just trying to get the public to be like, I don't like change, but we got to do something to this road, and just building from there. And on the historic part of it, so parts of Interstate 64, just as an example, in St. Louis, were actually built in the 1930s and had this beautiful Art Deco like detailing to the bridge abutments, and there was no way for us to save them. So what we did to incorporate that historic feature that people liked about the road was that our basic aesthetic element, we tried to include some Art Deco nods to the past in what was on the sound walls, what was on the street signs, so that they felt like we were maintaining some of that. So it may not be perfect or what they wanted originally, but it's trying to find that happy medium that ultimately lets us build what we know needs to get done for the good of everyone.
I think also maybe just to expand on the first couple of points that you made, at the beginning of Tim's portion of the presentation, he was talking about Propel Indy, which is a project that we're looking at the interstates inside of our Beltway. But it being a PEL, or a planning and environmental linkage study, which is kind of I would say a newer way of looking at things pre-NEPA. It's been an interesting learning curve with many of the stakeholders, because they're used to the point in which we engage them is when we're laying out alternatives on the table and saying, which ones impact you, which ones don't, versus when you're in the PEL process pre-NEPA, it's really starting that conversation. How are you using these facilities? What would you like to see changed? And so it's really a shift in how we interact with the public and the way that they perceive our projects.
Great, thank you. We have a couple of questions about I-69. What setbacks have there been with the construction, and what do you plan to do to address some of these other setbacks?
Well, I'll be the first to say, in 2018, we said we were going to complete it and have it open to traffic by 2024, and we will open it up to traffic by 2024. So maybe setbacks, let me just say challenges. And then obviously when we started this and let our largest contract of $728 million, we awarded that in 2019. The world changed in 2020. So we've been able to work with our suppliers, work with our industry partners through that pandemic to make sure we do remain on schedule. So you want to talk about maybe the labor and
Sure. Yeah, so we have had, some of the materials, as an example, some of the pipes, some of the fabric that's used as part of the construction process. We saw an increased lead time for those materials. And so really going back to the topic of partnering in those progress meetings, kind of flagging those issues as early on as we could to ensure that we could absorb those lead times within the construction phasing. There were some areas where we had to resequence based on when materials were available. Another thing that we've encountered is, just the sheer number of major projects that we have going on here in Indiana. Our MSE wall supplier, as an example, was having a little bit of difficulty keeping up with the orders that had been placed. And so once again, it's going back and looking at, how can things be resequenced or rephased to keep the work progressing while you're still waiting on those materials.
And Pat, this goes back to the original premise of what this is all about, is public engagement in the decision-making process. If we hadn't built the trust of many of our stakeholders, whether it be the media, our property owners, our legislature, our elected officials, you name it, when those challenges people rally around you to help you overcome those challenges if they trust that you will do, a good job. And so that's, I know it can be years or a decade in before, but as long as you build that trust, you never know 10 years later when you need some help with a challenge. And I'm not talking financial, I'm just saying, some assistance or some mentoring or whatnot, they're much more able to work alongside you if you built that trust from the very beginning of a project.
And Pat, I'm going to jump in there because I see that other question about trust. How do you build that trust? Because I think it starts from the beginning, and it's whether you have good news or bad news to talk about, you have to be the source of that news. You have to share, hey, we're having a setback. Or, gosh, we plan to get this open by this day, but we've run into supply or this or that, and just being open and sharing with people. If people don't feel that you are telling them everything and they hear the bad news from another source, then you start to tip away at that trust. So hopefully that helped take care of that question as well, because I know we're at the end.
Yep. So we are unfortunately out of time. So I wanted to thank our moderators and presenters, and thank all of our attendees for participating in today's webinar. Thank you.